In case you haven't noticed, the French Republic is at death's door. It's got one foot in the grave. And I think the only question remaining is how France can and should repatriate tens of millions of people out of its territory. Everything else is padding and froth. Now, you might say, I'm not concerned about what goes on in France, but what goes on in France concerns you, because if the French Republic goes down, the French economy will go down and the French welfare state will go down. That means that the whole of French civil society will go down. It will drag down, the French economy going down will drag down the Eurozone economy, and that will drag down our economy and then our welfare state. And then I think that will bring civil collapse to us. So we should be watching what goes on in France. It does matter. They're at the centre of the Eurozone. And I don't think we've even seen the beginning of this. Think of France at the moment as being like a really fine French restaurant. And think of the French Republic as being a customer to that restaurant. They allowed themselves to be ushered into that restaurant very politely and tempted in by a lot of offers of multicultural dining in this fine multicultural restaurant, staffed by some very badly motivated, very incompetent, toxic or toxin-producing chefs. And then in 2005, they allowed themselves to be strapped into a chair at that table. And over the last week, the French Republic has had to sit there and to smell the burning fumes that the multicultural chefs in that kitchen are producing with the foul five-course meal that they're cooking up. And so far, the French Republic hasn't even had the hors d'oeuvre to the five-course meal that will be force-fed to it whilst it is tied in that chair at that table. And I don't see anything that the French Republic can do to save itself. That's not the same as France. That's the French Republic. Now, what I want to go through is a few things. Firstly, how this was covered in the media. It's quite revealing. Secondly, the political polarization that has come about as a result. Who the winners are, who the losers are, what's coming, and then what's coming in the long term. And finally, what I think France should do. But firstly, what I'd like to do is to play you this introduction video. It's a kind of a greatest hits of what happened over the last week. It gives you a flavour for just how destructive it was. So if I go to here and then I'll play it. So give me a second.
Wesh, au nom de Dieu. Ah non, c'est délicat à Sevran. Oh, oh, wesh. Wesh. Bolso. Comme bordel ça. C'est quoi ce bordel, frère?
Mal dominant partie 2, cousin. Ah, c'est votre... machine à café.
Je me suis dit non, prenez pas. Moi je rentre pas, je reste ici.
Ça c'est pour elle. Ils ont sorti les gros moyens.
Ah oui.
Ils sont fous les gars.
viens là. Vas-y, vas-y.
So pretty destructive stuff. I'm surprised that a few more people weren't killed, but I'll say more about that later. In case you don't know, what happened was a 17-year-old foreigner in France, a French Algerian. He defied a traffic stop. He was stopped by the police, and then he drove off, and the policeman shot him. We don't know the full facts yet. The French government immediately condemned it, and so did the French Home Secretary, to the praise of the BBC. And of course, it was for appeasement reasons, which never work and didn't work here, and the rioting and looting that engulfed every major city in France. Now, I don't think the rioting had anything to do with that. I think it was about a power grab. It was about establishing sovereignty, foreigners establishing their sovereignty over French territory, with a big dose of drug lord control. And I don't even think the mother was as grief-stricken as everyone was claiming to be, as witnessed the videos of her riding on a big truck, a big lorry, holding her arms in the air, grinning from ear to ear and blowing kisses to everyone. And here's a video of her revving up a motorbike. Let me just play this one. Hold on. Now you tell me how grief-stricken she looks there. When I was a prosecutor, if a file like that had if that had been a football riot, and I'd been shown a file like that, and containing a video like that, I think I would have very seriously considered prosecuting her for being an instigator of the riot. Putting a raised fist and revving up the motorbike, that is instigating. I've certainly very happily prosecuted football hoolies for doing less than that. Anyway, the result was the French police could barely cope. I think 45,000 cops moved into Paris. Then when they subdued Paris, they then moved down to Marseille, which suggests to me they didn't have enough cops to subdue Paris and Marseille at the same time. I think that bodes really ill for the future of order in France, because the next riots are going to be worse than these. The other thing I think is that this is not about lack of opportunity for those foreigners living in those ghettos. They get massive sums of money. A lady called Anne Elizabeth Moutet, she's a writer for a French lady who writes for the Daily Telegraph, she stated that between 2000 and 2015, those sensitive urban zones, i.e. the ghettos, they got 150 billion euros. So that's 10 billion euros a year for 15 years straight. Now that sounds like a lot of money to me. My area is not getting 10 billion euros pumped into it. I don't think it's about lack of opportunity at all. And the things that were bought with that money were paid for. Doctors' surgeries, schools, sports centres, community centres, they were the first things that got burned down by the rioters. This is about power, control, sovereignty over territory. And the thing that matters, the thing that's the most important thing, is the demographic tidal wave that is already moving towards France. That demography is going to hit the French Republic like one of those burning lorries during the riots. And I've done a couple of vids dealing with them. I won't go through the demographics here in any detail. What I'll do is, if I go to, hold on, if I just go to a couple of vids, show you a couple of vids that I did. That's the first one, birth rates in Britain and France. And the next one is this one, more on French demographics. And the carry home message from those videos is based on the sickle cell anemia testing, which you can only have done if you are more than 50% African. So President Obama couldn't have had one of those tests. The carry home message is that by today, more than 50%, I would say comfortably more than 50% of babies born in France are non-white. So not just non-French, but non-white. And that is, and considering the age at which these people riot, that is going to hit home very soon. And that number is increasing. It'll be more than 50%. Within less than a decade, it'll be 60%. Now, it's that demographic tidal wave that, combined with the destructiveness and the hostility and rejection of France that was that characterised those riots, I think that is those things together are the ruling underlying factor here. They are they're the thing that's what scares people. That's what people can't handle, because it just ploughs through any idea of a civil polity. The civil polity is going to be destroyed by this, and people can't and will not handle it. People are ignoring it, excusing it, talking around it. The modern word, it's very crude, but I think it's appropriate, is a cope or a rationalisation, or the fancy word is a ratiocination. And that's what's happening. Exactly like a cancer victim. If you think of France as being a cancer patient, and you think of the large cities as being the lymph nodes, this has spread to the lymph nodes and is forming secondaries around the whole of France. France has stage 4 cancer. It is soon going to die. It is unpleasant. It is as ugly as that. And I think the fact that people just cannot cope with it, and such a wide range, the inability to cope with this occupies such a wide range of the political spectrum. That is what is interesting. The level of cope or rationalisation. And the reason I think people find it so difficult to handle is because the choice is very stark for France. Either you repatriate tens of millions, scores, more than a score of million people from your territory, or you are going to lose France altogether. And people can't handle that. That's such an unthinkable thought. And the problem is, on the other side, in front of them, it is equally unthinkable, because do you lose France, or do you engage in methods that your self-image can't handle, let alone what other people think of you? And so people are engaging in a lot of very empty talk, meandering around in order to avoid the rampaging elephant in the room. Now, I want to deal with the coverage that there was of these riots. The coverage was extremely bad. But before I do, let me just go to this report, just so to outline what the damage was. What you had was nearly, here it says, nearly 5,800 vehicles burned in a week. You had over 1,000 or 1,083 buildings set on fire or degraded. I think that means public buildings. I don't think that includes private buildings. I think that's just public buildings. And 3,400 people arrested, 45,000 riot police employed. And then if I go to this map, this shows you, I think this was after one night of rioting. This is how quickly it spread throughout the whole of France. Every little red dot, that's a major town in France. It spread very, very fast. Almost as if it was orchestrated by someone. Could even be the drug gangs, who knows? So how did the mainstream media handle it? I would say absolutely abysmally. Every criticism that the mainstream media level at messenger apps and social media for news feeds really applies to the mainstream media, but certainly on this occasion that was the case. Fake news, the inability to check, laziness, a lack of curiosity, a lack of investigative skill. So what I did a screen grabs from, I think this is from the first 3 days of rioting, and this is what the BBC, this is their sort of carry home selection of stories about what happened. French policeman charged over traffic stop death. Who was Nahel M shot by police in Nanterre? That's a lovely story. It has the grandmother saying he was a good boy, and has the mother saying when I last saw him he gave me a big kiss. That lady who was revving up the motor scooter, yeah, he gave her a big kiss before he went away. And then firearm law blamed for Nahel's death. And so then if I go to the second day, then how a teenager's death sparked riots in France. Why are French police using guns during traffic stops? French policeman charged over traffic stop death. Who was Nahel M shot by police in Nanterre? France is changing, but suburban areas are not heard. So the message they're trying to put forward, that the BBC here are trying to say, is the main story is about this 17-year-old criminal. What some of the reports suggest he was really quite a nasty criminal, and quite an unpleasant character, and or he'd certainly had a lot of run-ins with the law before. And but what the BBC want you to know is that this was really, these riots were a completely understandable and natural response to the shooting of this teenager. And on the third day, the same thing. Macron accuses looters of exploiting teen death. Watch what happened in days after Paris killing. Why are French police using guns? And French policeman charged over traffic death. And who is Nahel M shot by police in Nanterre? And it continues. So after the rioting, this is the BBC. France riots fueled by everyday discrimination. And here we have the Observer or the Guardian. The Observer view on the riots in France, a grim tale of the growing gulf between haves and have-nots. And then you have here the Guardian. They're not saying it's about economic inequality, they're saying it's about people not being listened to. The Guardian view on unrest in France, the language of the unheard. A police officer shot dead a teenager at point-blank range. People want to know what will change. Okay, and then you had this one from, this is Sky News. France riots, youth told us in most blunt terms possible that we weren't welcome. I think from reading the story I get the impression that they go to investigate and someone comes up and says, hey, get out of here. And that I think from reading the story I suspect they got out. So not really very, you get out of the, if you got out of the area, what news do you have to report? And then after the riots, this is Sky News. France is like a pressure cooker inside the concrete jungles where extreme poverty may have fueled riots. And the go-to person that they interview is this person, Amina Kasachi, and says his brother fell into drugs before he was murdered. So this is the person they're going to. And who's the person the BBC are going to? Oh yes, exactly the same person. Why is it? I think we can say that's not particularly enterprising mainstream media reporting. France riots, for the politicians, we are nothing. So another quote from him. I wonder if there doesn't seem to be very much here prying into his background, trying to find out, is he who he says he is? We know his brother was into drugs and got killed, presumably for a drug debt or by a drug gang, for his involvement in drugs somehow. Who is this guy? What is it about him? Why are Sky and BBC both going to him? Well, anyway, I think mainstream media coverage has been very poor. If you wanted news on this story, it's much better to go to the messenger apps, the feeds that they give. I find that they provide information fast and they do check that information. They're painfully aware that when news comes in fast, you don't have time to check it, so it could be unreliable, and they will come back and correct and say, no, we made a mistake there, this isn't quite what it seemed to be, which I don't see the mainstream media news outlets doing. I don't see them going into any kind of depth, getting anything like the footage and information that these messenger apps are able to supply, which I found to be very good on what's gone on in France here, as you'll be able to judge. Okay, so who were the winners and who were the losers. Well, before I deal with that, I'd like to deal with polarization. That, I think, is one of the main effects, the main things that's going to happen to France now. What you have, the people who are left standing on solid ground are the hard left and the hard right, and pretty much the whole spectrum in between, especially, I think, the civic nationalist, patriotic people, the people who think that France is about its civic institutions, or about values, or about its national life. That is, those people, they have seen the ground swept out from under them as if by a tidal wave, just dissolved away. The reason I think the hard left are doing well is because they don't care about reality. The hard left, I mean the Black Hoods, Antifa, what they care about is, does what is going on support our cause? Is it going to bring down the state so that we can then usher in the utopia that we are in control of? And if yes, then we are in favour of it. There was much interest in realism and verisimilitude as a porn addict has. A porn addict doesn't ask, is what I'm watching realistic? He says, does it make me feel good? And that is what the hard left, that's all the hard left asked them. And the answer to them over the last one, or the answer they're able to give themselves as a result of these riots is yes, it does support what they want, because it is bringing down the French Republic. So they are effectively standing on hard ground. They supported the rioters, not in the looting, but in the mistaken or self-serving apprehension that these riots were purely political. They were about rebellion against the exploitative, oppressive capitalist state. And you can see a little bit of this in another video, which I'll bring up here, of left-wing people, white left-wing people. What you see is the people looting the stores, setting fire to supermarkets, setting fire to schools and doctor surgeries. They are the foreigners, sub-Saharan Africans and North Africans. And the people who are perhaps helping them to set fire to police stations, and the people who are maybe even helping them throw things at town halls, there will be white faces amongst that. And the people who are turning up at court to support the people getting prosecuted, they are almost exclusively, very largely white people. Let me show you this video. Now this is white people, or French people, outside a French court where some of the rioters are being charged, and they're shouting, "Everyone hates the police." Okay, I think you get the flavour of that. I'd say that's the hard left, defending those rioters by saying everyone hates the police. It's the kind of stupid thing the hard left say, but they are not undermined by these events. Now, the other people who are vindicated and who are left standing on solid ground are the hard right. And by that I mean the hard nationalist right, not the soft nationalist right. I'll come to them a little bit more in a minute. And what's interesting is the breadth of political opinion that is left undermined high and dry without ground to stand on. What I want to do is to go through a few examples just to show you, because it's really quite I found it really surprising and entertaining to watch how people will talk and say nothing because they don't want to mention the big gorilla in the room. Now this is the first one. This is the soft left. They're not left standing on any solid ground. And this is a French MP, Sandrine Rousseau, and she's saying, is this pillaging, this looting, is it to do with poverty? Is it to do with a feeling of relegation, of being relegated? And she hasn't done very well out of that. There's the best comment there is this person just saying, "I'm only here for the comments." So that's the soft left have been undermined. And then on what I find is in our country, in Britain, the number of people on the soft right, the gently patriotic right, over to quite people who would regard themselves as being, or who would have been accused of being far right, see them as being quite alternative, quite out there. They just don't seem to be able to talk about it. Now this is GB News. I mean, I could play you a little bit of the video just to give you a flavour of it. I could be doing this lady an injustice, but it reads, it plays just like a jumble sale of words. And then you have this one in The Spectator. The Spectator, I think, has done poorly throughout this. This is Douglas Murray. I'm quite hard on Douglas Murray. Everyone else seems very impressed with him, and he certainly makes a lot of money. But I find him just so disappointing. He's always middle of the roading and never really comes to a point as to what people should do. Trying to sound like a tough guy, but just not being able to manage it. I mean, if I go to the end of what he's saying here, and this sort of sums up. The truth is that France has allowed the law breaking just as Britain has, and we allow it still. We permit people to break into our countries, we put them up in hotels, let them disappear, and blame ourselves if their lives don't go right. Well, what's he saying people should do there? Well, what is your solution, I hear you say? Yeah, you do, yeah. Well, we could start by sending away anyone who is here illegally, but no politician in either country will do that, so we just have to keep taking the very rough with the not so smooth. So there we are. I think a completely inadequate flea bite of a solution there, and we shouldn't consider it anyway because no politician's going to consider it. Right, thanks for that. Or here, let me play you a little bit of this one. I don't want to be mean to Douglas Murray. I think he's talking as a way of not getting to the point.
In these terms, it should be perfectly obvious by now, and I've said this very clearly for a long time. We have to be able to say, as countries, as Australia, France, Britain, if you come here and you complain about it all the time and you don't like it and you think we're horrible and racist and you'd like to burn it down, we'd like you to leave. We don't want you here. You're not welcome.
Okay, I guess you would go to people and say, do you want to burn the country down? And if they said, yes, I would like to burn the country down, you say, well, would you mind leaving, please? I mean, what's the point of such talk? Now, the next one is something that I saw in the Telegraph. This is about what you could call, the fancy term for it would be the bias towards optimism. It's where people say, well, of course there's bad news over there, but it wouldn't happen here because it wouldn't happen to me because we saw a lot of this during the beginnings of the 2008 financial crisis. Well, yes, of course, the housing market's breaking down over in America, but that won't happen here. And of course it did. It became a global breakdown. And this fellow, Dr. Rakib Ehsan, writing in the Telegraph, supposedly conservative paper, Macron can learn from our successes. The rigid French model is coming unstuck. Our, meaning Britain's, flexible approach gives people freedom and is repaid with far greater integration. Well, that wasn't being said during the 2011 riots. It wasn't being said after the 7/7 bombings in 2005. It wasn't being said after the Oldham and Bradford riots in 2001. So I will take that with a pinch of salt. I think that is saying that is what people do in times of crisis. Oh, we're so much better, it won't affect us. And I think a similar thing came from Andrew Neil, who is, I understand he's chairman of The Spectator. Here's a little video with him. I'll just get rid of the transcripts. And Why Europe Riots, Andrew Neil and Jonathan Miller. I think the Jonathan Miller fella, he says at one stage there is institutional racism in France, or almost institutional racism in France. And I'll just play you a little clip of what Andrew Neil says, so you can. I think this again is saying it won't happen here. This is a peculiarly French problem. One of the points he makes is the reason we don't have diversity problems in Britain, like they do in France, is because our diversity is so much more diverse than French diversity, and therefore we don't have these problems. That's basically what he says at one point. But let me play this point to you.
There's an underclass is being created. Many of us saw it coming years and years ago, but nothing was done about it. And this underclass in the banlieue, in the ghettos, in the poorest suburb exists in a mixture of welfare dependency and quite violent criminality. And how you deal with that, because we've dealt with it basically by just shutting it off there. But although it's a serious social problem, it is not a threat to the state. It's an embarrassment to the state.
Okay, that sounds like denial to me. But, well, maybe I'm being too hard there. I don't think it's treating the situation with anything like the seriousness it deserves. I think because it is so overwhelming. What's coming down the line is, I think, overwhelming. And I think people have this deep underlying sense of that. And it's frightening. But if you want to listen to something really disappointing, and some of the commenters under this video take them to task for this, this is the New Culture Forum, Logetta Andy Go, or Andy Go. Apparently he's supposed to be a bit of an American firebrand. If you listen to any of this video, it is so dull, and they tiptoe around all the issues. I think they're just scared of saying a word out of place. That's the way it seems to me. Andy Go on France's race riots and the violence spawned by segregation. Okay, now these, I'll just show you the three fellas. That's the three fellas there, Andy Go in the middle, and if I go back to the point that I was at, bear with me.
The French, it's unfair to immigrants who are actually trying to assimilate, because that makes it just so much harder for them to do so. And, you know, their neighborhoods are literally being torn apart. So I don't know, as much as we should talk about the host populations, I always do have a little bit of empathy left for these people who really are being put in an impossible situation of their own that I think is often overlooked. And I think maybe, you know, a good solution, a peaceful solution to these problems would be to identify the community leaders in these groups and try to empower them, and, you know, perhaps by using platforms like this, or using, you know, government interventions of some way to make this case known and to make them feel kind of protected and promoted from within their own communities. Maybe I mean, I genuinely can't think of another more peaceful, pragmatic solution than that.
Yes. I mean, and it's true as well, isn't it? That most in the BLM Antifa riots in 2020, the primary victims of those riots were people who lived, as Evan says, like or in the case of France, in America too, people who lived in minority neighborhoods. I mean, that's where most of the property damage was, like $2 billion's worth or something like that, maybe 1.2 billion worth of property damage done in the 2020 BLM Antifa riots. Those people are the primary victims. Do you think that there's do you agree with Evan that there's room to try and reach out an olive branch, so to speak, to those people and elevate them while deporting all of the troublemakers?
Nervous laughter there. I mean, that is the exciting bit of that video. So if you want to waste 43 minutes of your life, it is so boring. That's what it says. The proposal is to empower community leaders, as if that hasn't been tried for the last 3 or 4 decades. And that, incidentally, that is the New Culture Forum. That is supposed to, the New Culture Forum, the name is supposed to be really out there. I think it was set up by Peter Whittle, who wanted to be leader of UKIP at one stage, and therefore must be far right. I mean, these people, I reckon these people probably consider themselves kind of radical, but cannot address the reality. I think because it is just too scary, too unpalatable. But this lady is someone that I really do have some empathy for. I think she can't handle it. This is Anne Elizabeth Moutet, the lady I referred to briefly previously. She seems to be a very proud French woman, proud of the French Republic, probably one ton of fun to get around some fancy French restaurant table with a group of people, loves the country, loves the Republic, wants it to continue. I get the impression she is devastated, very upset by what's happening in her country, and is really struggling to come to terms with it. I do have some sympathy for her, but that doesn't change the fact that she's trying to talk her way out of the seriousness of the situation that the French Republic is in. Let me play you this bit, because she is she's telling a story about her friendly local Moroccan greengrocer. Where have you heard that before? Yeah, the friendly newsagent around the corner. So they can't all be like it, can they? And she's telling this story. That is a cope. That is a rationalisation. But let me just play this clip so you get a flavour of it.
Burn it. So people are angry, and I will tell the tale of the greengrocer whose shop is opposite my house in Paris, and he is Moroccan. He is a devout Muslim. He has sent his 5 children to a paying Catholic church because he wanted his 5 children to have a good education. And when you do this, it works. His 5 children speak like the children of ministers, and they have good jobs in large French companies because, the family was holding together. Of course, my friend did not leave his wife because he was bored with her. He stayed with her. They're a wonderful couple. And you have lots of tales like this in France. And you have to remember William Bratton quote in the 90s in New York saying it takes 400 people to terrorize an area in New York. I think it was in Queens of 100,000 inhabitants. And we have those here.
So the tale of the friendly neighbourhood greengrocer. She also defends Marseille when it's put to her that Marseille is beyond the control of the French Republic. She says, no, Marseille's been going since the time of the Greeks, and it's a really lively place. And yeah, I bet it's been very lively over the last week. I'm mocking her, but I do have some sympathy for her general, I think the kind of emotional trauma she's been through. With this, the realization, the underlying realization that her republic is going to break down. This has religious significance for a lot of people because welfare democracy, that is the modern religion. That has replaced religion. So for a lot of people, it's like watching your church get bulldozed. It's a little bit like watching the dissolution of the monasteries 500 years ago. It is, and this lady has a hard time handling it. And by the way, tell me she looks like a happy lady there. Tell me she hasn't been crying. I suspect she is in quite some mourning for what she sees is going to happen to the French Republic. And I think she can't conceive of France without the French Republic. And I think she is aware of the 2 things that I've mentioned: the destructiveness, the hostility and ill will of these riots, coupled with the massive, the demographic tidal wave that is really hitting France at an accelerating rate. Okay, I have laboured that because that is the thing that has jumped out at me. Most of what people say when they're talking about these riots across a wide spectrum is just pabulum, tedium, rationalisation and cope. All right, now, who were the winners and the losers? Well, as I've said, the hard left, they've been the winners out of this. Other people who have been winners have been the police. And I want to go and show you this about the police if I go to the next story. So the first thing to notice is the cop who shot Nahel. He had 1.6 million raised for his family to help him, and the family of Nahel, although their campaign ran for quite a bit longer, several days longer, they got about a third of that, less than a third of that, 464,000 euros. So French people are supporting the cop. I think that's a political statement that people are making, and the Nahel's family's lawyer apparently is not happy about it. I think there's an idea that he suggested getting the fellow who ran this GoFundMe page prosecuted for inciting hatred or something like that. I can't quite remember it, but it is a political statement that people are making, and the police have won out of that. Now let me go to the next one. Now the police have won in other ways. Macron has had to come out. He's had to abandon the old strategy. Was that whenever there's trouble, you throw a lot of money, overtime money at the police, you get them to combat the trouble, but you also scapegoat the police. When something goes wrong, you blame the police, you throw individual coppers under the bus. That happened after the 2005 riots, where they had a report which blamed the police, saying the police should have warned the 2 criminals who jumped into an electricity substation and got electrocuted. There's no way the cops could have warned them. But that's the kind of thing. Blame the police, but also pay them a lot of money because and get them to do your dirty work because you need them. And Macron can't do that anymore. So, and this from one of the Messenger app feeds. According to multiple medias, including Politico, Macron's short-term answer to the crisis will include the following: no compromise on the police's role, full support. Well, they hope. And caving in to the Republican Party's demand to drop regularization of migrants who do essential jobs. So previously migrants who did what were thought of as essential jobs couldn't get deported. And then no 2005-like bailout of the cities. That means the ghettos. And France can't afford to do that anyway. He has no option on that. More state regulation of the internet. We're going to get a lot of that. I think we know which side will get hurt the most out of that. I don't think it's going to be the foreigners. And more control over what happens in schools. That could mean anything. Okay, and then Macron is calling this his Republican defence and re-civilization. All right, and there he is standing in front of some policemen. They've all got blank expressions from what I can tell. And he's saying, Emmanuel Macron thanked the police, the gendarmes and the firefighters for their exceptional mobilisation in recent nights. I know how difficult these have been for you and your families. You have my support. Okay. Well, again, they hope. And he's also drafted a law which basically says that if there's trouble like this in the future, the police or the authorities can requisition anyone and anything in order to support them in fighting the rioting. So Macron is having to show support for the police. Basically, they are the only thing that's going to save his hide. He's got 4 more years to go, and it's not going to be nice for him. He needs the police. So the police are the winners here. Now, the other winners have been the drug lords, effectively the big money men in the ghettos, and they have a lot of control. They effectively rule the ghettos. They've got the muscle, they've got the violence, they've got the money to pay people off, to bribe people, and I think this is evident in the relative lack of guns throughout these riots. There were occasions when guns were fired into the sky. There weren't a lot of shootings or killings by shootings, murders by guns. What there was a very heavy use of fireworks, and lorries, huge caches of fireworks were discovered. I speculate that those caches of fireworks may have been bought and paid for by drug lords, because what they want is to increase their control, their sovereignty over the territory where foreigners live, that foreigners run. They want to increase their control, partly for power and partly for money. Two things that people love. People love power and money. I think they love power more than they love money, but people certainly love money. And I think this is also evident in the fact that these riots only lasted for 1 week. Now, let me go to this story. This is from again from a news feed. TF1, that is a French news service, says that drug dealers played a role in the return to order after having suffered economic losses. Now, I find it quite notable that in the first few days, Macron didn't seem to be doing much, and what was being suggested time and again was that the government's strategy was to wait for the drug lords to impose order again. I think, and that's been reported by TF1 news channel. And the French police union says calm was restored not through French state coercion, but thanks to drug dealers who wanted a return to order. This hypothesis was widely circulated at the start of the unrest, as this news channel reported back then. And then a source told Global Intel Watch that the understanding of at least parts of the police about what happened is that the organised criminals green-lighted and around, this is written by a Frenchman, 1 week-long unrest in order to win more profit thereafter, thanks to reduced police activity. Now, I should say, although there were remarkably few killings, there were a couple of deaths during these riots. I think the French state, the French Republic, will pay in blood for these riots, because I think the disorder and the redirection of the focus of police away from other duties will have meant that a lot of weapons, a lot of drugs, a lot of other things will have been smuggled into France, would have been got across the border. So I think this 1 week gap in police enforcement will have been very useful to the drug lords. Now, the two other winners, I think, were hard right nationalists and the army. Let me deal with hard right nationalists. I mean, the ones who want France for the French and are willing to put in the thought to think it through. And they, I think, have had quite a lot of influence in making sure that relatively few nationalist people went out onto the streets during this rioting. Some did. In Lyon, there were a few. They were quickly contained. I think mainly football hooligans, football fans, they couldn't resist it. They lacked self-control. Most of them are pretty low lives. They just thought, well, we're going to go out and contribute to the violence. And the intelligent ones said, no, let's stand back. And here you have this guy here. I won't play the video. It's a fellow called Papacito, and he talks very intelligently. And he's far-right influencer, Papacito, to his followers. Do not intervene. Let the Republic go to the end of its logic. I'll read a little bit of the transcript here. What he was saying, which seems to have been taken on board by quite a lot of nationalist activists. I think there are a fair few in France, Génération Identitaire and other groups, better coordinated groups than I think we have here, or bigger groups anyway. You have to be strategic, and I remind you that we're Europeans. Right now meaning the foreigners, are doing the job for us. It's perfect. They're way more effective than any political video. I made a little video today to show how rotten was the Republic. They're doing 1,000 times better. They're humiliating it even internationally. We're 1 year away from the Olympic Games, and here's what France is. Here's what everyone sees on TV, so let it be. After a while, they'll call people like us, to come and clean up. For now, just sit tight. And that, what he's saying, I think, is supported by what else appears to have been happening. So far-right militias reporting to Global Intel Watch, they have a very good time regarding recruitment. And again, nationalist militias claiming to have an increasingly successful heart and mind strategy with local business owners. That sounds like protection. I wonder if that's a protection racket or simply saying we will protect you. My guess is there's money in it. Business owners who increasingly see the nationalist militias with a good eye. And this one, that's about the military. Well, I'll turn to the military. I think the military, again, like even more than the hard right nationalists, what you have is the army standing back. The army, I'm not aware of the army having said anything during these riots, and the army generals have spoken out before. A couple of years ago, 40 generals and 20,000 soldiers signed a letter addressed to French politicians saying, civil war is coming, you've got to get a grip. And I think they talked about the battle for France. And so French military source insists the military will not intervene in this situation. Asked about what would happen if there was an armed fight between policemen and protesters, the source answered, not our job, as simple as that. So the army are standing back for now. I'll come to them quite a bit more in a minute, and I think we can understand why. And if we go to the next one, hold on, this one here. The public reaction being massively in favour of soldiers who helped the police so far. You had off-duty soldiers going out onto the streets and helping the police, and they were criticised, but the public reaction was very much in favour. Okay, that's Marine Le Pen. I'll come to her in a minute. So the losers, I think, pretty much included all Republican politicians or politicians of the French Republic, from what I can tell. From patriots to civic nationalists. If I start with Marine Le Pen, this is what she had to say. It's thin stuff and it hasn't done her any good.
Dans le moindre village, Il faut ensuite reprendre la main dans tous les quartiers de France, rétablir l'autorité des parents, refaire de l'école le creuset de la République, rendre à la justice sa fermeté, sans laquelle elle restera impuissante à protéger les Français.
None of what she's saying addresses the overriding issue, overriding and underlying issue, and that is the demographics, the growth of the foreign population within France. Restoring the authority of the parents or the authority of the schools or gaining control of the districts of France, it's just spitting in the wind. And this has not done her a lot of good. If we look at this one shows the new post-riots poll in France, i.e. how the political parties are doing. The left-wing NUPEs, they've lost 5 points. The centre-right, the Republicans, they've won 3 points. The Rally National, that's Marine Le Pen, they've got 1 point. Another one called R! DLF. I don't know who they are, they've got 1 point. And Macron gained a point. Even Macron gained a point. So Marine Le Pen hasn't had the boost that people have been saying she would get out of this. The next loser is Macron. His measures will fail. I think you can best describe them as scratching the surface of the tip of the iceberg after the horse has bolted. I'll be surprised if it'll save the Olympics for him, but let's just see again what he's saying. No compromise on the police's role, deport people who are doing essential jobs, and no bailout of the ghettos and more control over the schools. He has no choice but to say things like this. It hasn't worked for him to try and curry favour with foreigners. When he was trying to get elected, he was saying, I don't see colour, I just see French people. That hasn't worked for him, so he's just got to try and get a bit tougher, but it's too little too late. And the reason I think it won't work is, well, this is another news item. Expect a lot of leniency from the judicial system towards the rioters, especially those who are minors. The judges' union signalled they weren't willing to suppress the protesters. And if you then move to the next one, the first sentences have been passed. This is in French, but basically what it is 4 months suspended and 140 hours of community service, i.e. not much. Those are light sentences for those riots. And then you have the Minister of Justice. He's printed off a load of leaflets, flyers that are going to be handed to parents of children who are in court, reminding the parents of their responsibilities. Yeah, I think we can call that milk and water. This is bad because, just to remind you, a year ago, what we saw was Liverpool fans at the Stade de France, where the Olympics are going to be held, getting badly beaten up and robbed at knife point by foreigners who targeted them in this very enriched area of Paris. You can read this report on the BBC. It's unusually honest. I'm surprised they published it at all. I don't think they published anything else about this problem. They tried to say it was all about police brutality. It wasn't. It was about the brutality of the foreigners living in Paris. Now, the other losers have been multiculturalists. Multiculturalism has not fared well as a result of these riots. Let me just show you this one. Nearly 1 in 2 French people believe the state should stop subsidising the suburbs, i.e. just pull the rug out from under them, stop giving them these extra payments because they are sensitive urban zones, let them earn their own living the way the rest of us have to. And then 64% of French believe that immigration from outside Europe should be stopped. That's a survey from 2.5 months ago. And women say 66%. So I'm guessing that's even higher after these riots. And why would women be more keen on stopping immigration than men, I wonder? I have no idea. Anyway, let me go to the next one. Now, before I do that, I just want to talk about a little bit about what's coming. What we're going to see, I think, is further polarization. That will set in, that will gradually bed down and harden. And as we've seen from the winners and losers, the hard left and hard right, I think they're going to be left standing. We'll see a very big weakening centre. I think we will see increased rumbling conflict and a breakdown of political balance, accompanied by a tidal wave of hollow talk from people who struggle to reject the reality that is coming at them with irresistible force, that demographic reality that's hitting the French Republic. And Macron's measures, I think they will fail. I think it's going to be a miserable next 4 years for him if he lasts another 4 years. I think there will be further riots and disorder as the drug lords expand their control further. This has been a very profitable week for the drug lords, and I would expect them gradually to be met with force by more efficient nationalist militias who know how to organise better and to create disciplined formations better than the foreigners. And I think we will see the breakdown of the system from the centre. But I think that is likely to be quite slow. I think it'll happen though. In the long term, I think we're likely to see the army and the hard right waiting for the Republic to break down. And I think that's probably the right thing to do. And by the way, lose your snobbery about French soldiers. They are hard fellas, and they can be extremely ruthless, too ruthless for my taste. But they're not the bunch of wimps that we sometimes like to portray them as being when we're French bashing. That's stupid. And now what I want to do is to refer, well, to illustrate that, what I want to refer to is an interview that was conducted with a French officer about just over 2 years ago. In April 2021, those 40 generals and 20,000 soldiers signed that letter to French politicians, basically saying, get a grip, otherwise civil war is coming. And a month later, a channel called Gallia Daily went and interviewed a French officer. I think he's about major level. That officer, he's in command of a company of about 150 men. I think that's the equivalent to a major in the British Army. And asked and did about seven hours worth of interview with him over three days. Now, I want to go through this because I think it's very revealing. Civil war is inevitable, says French officer. And if you want to find this, you can Google it under that title. It'll come up. The channel who did the interview is Gallia Daily. I don't know him. I had contact with two people who had dealt with him. They both spoke very highly of him. And so I think what he's saying here, it has authenticity. I believe that this interview took place as he said. He then transcribed it into English. And this is the French general this French officer giving his opinion of the letter that was written by the French generals to the French politicians, and also giving his opinion about what will happen. It's 28 pages. I can't read the whole thing. There are some highlights that I'll deal with here. Now, the first thing, the military see very well, this is this French officer talking, the military see very well the slope on which our country is going. And the letter sums it up, that's the French general's letter, sums it up very well. We're heading straight for a violent breakup of the country. Any honest military man can see this, but no military man is allowed to say so. And it goes down a bit. The situation is, I think, infinitely more serious than our elders let on. So he says that the situation is more serious than those 40 generals, the elders, were saying. He thinks it is definitely headed for civil war, and that is unavoidable. And what's striking from this letter is firstly the unflinching clarity. Secondly, the unanimity of opinion amongst French officers, or what he claims is unanimity of opinion, that they're all talking about it, they all agree with what he's saying. And the amount of thought and debate, wargaming that has gone into this. I admire the clarity that this French officer is displaying here, and I envy the fact that he has so many other people to game it out with. I certainly wish I did. And what he's saying here is, there is no survey, so you will have to take my word for it. But to give you an example, We discussed this letter a lot, that's the French general's letter, with some of my former classmates at the École Militaire Interim, and that's a military school, and the entirety of my classmates agree with the letter. Not 51%, not 60%, 100%, 100%. Same thing as Cyr, that's Saint-Cyr, that's another military school, and the same is true of the last graduating class at St. Max, which is a non-commissioned officers school. A young corporal from my company was laughing and saying to his sergeant, "Damn, our families think we're going to fight against ISIS in the desert, but in fact we're going to end up in an armoured personnel carrier in the Yvelines. The battle of our lives is going to be the Battle of France." It's anecdotal, but I think it represents well the feeling of a large part of the French soldiers. The battle of our life, it will be the Battle of France. And then I say this for the French and most for other people. Now this is where he's asked, is the French army going to intervene and save the French people? And he says, no one's coming to save you. You've got to do the heavy lifting yourself. I say this for the French and most other people. There is no group in the shadows working to defend your interests. There is no conspiracy of generals, billionaires, or politicians to change things on behalf of the people. There is no such thing. Now this is, I respect this about him. He's basically saying to the French people, you have to deal with this yourselves. You are the key to this. We can't save you. We, the soldiers, can't do it. What matters is what the French people want and what they're willing to do. It is very likely, for one reason or another, the French population will start moving on more or less clear grounds. And it is very likely that at that moment, once the window of opportunity is open, the army will take advantage of it and put all its weight on one side or the other. Now the ball is in the court of the French. The main actor of the next act will not be the army, it will be the French people. It will be you. The most powerful army in France is you, a coalition of 67 million civilians. That's him talking directly to the French population. And then when he's asked what did he think of the general's analysis, and he said, what is threatened is not our Republican value. I agree with this bit. Not our Republican values or our laws or our parliamentary system or our living altogether. What is threatened is France. It's the right of the French to have a territory to live in, or to rephrase it in terms that are certainly polemical but more precise. What is threatened in the medium and long term is the native French. That is right. That is how the I think people understand that, people realise that. That's why people are so scared of the demographic problem, and that is why people are just talking their way, weaving their way around the problem without addressing it. The elites and the lobbies are guilty of betraying and striking France in the back. The colonising populations are guilty of beating down a country already on the ground. So you can see what he thinks about French politicians, the elites. That's a little visual, a diagram of the sickle cell anemia testing. That showed basically nearly 40% of French babies getting tested in 2016. So 7 years on, I reckon that's getting on for 50%. And then that wouldn't include Lebanese, Arabs, Afghans, Pakistanis, or Sub-Saharan Africans. So I think by now the number of babies who are non-white, who are, let alone non-French, is well in excess of 50%. And going down, the moment these debates are childish and hypocritical, but the discussion will become more tense and radical as the French understand that this is not just a theoretical debate. So it's not just numbers, demographic calculations on a spreadsheet. When they understand that it is their lives as individuals and as people that are at stake. Do the French people understand the gravity of the situation? Absolutely not. But sincerely, most of the French people do not understand at all what is being played out. And his timing is in 2050, this is the year your son or daughter will have their first child. This child will be born in a France where more than 65% of the other children will be of African origin. I think it'll be significantly more than 65% by 2050, just on the raw maths alone. And Today, the balance of power is shifting to the political arena. This is the crucial phase, the penultimate phase. When politics will fail to solve the problem, we will enter the military phase. And so the question is no longer, how can we act to avoid the breakup of the country, the division, the partition, the civil war? The only question is, when will this breakup come and how will we triumph? Yeah, I think that those are the right questions. I slightly disagree with him about his conclusions on the second one, but we'll come to that. To put it more clearly, it seems obvious to me that the native French will de facto control the vast majority of the territory with a disconcerting ease, but this does not mean that the war will be won. In this kind of war, controlling one's territory is necessary, but victory is obtained in another way, by mobilizing its population and international opinion in order to find the legitimacy to definitively remove the pebble in its shoe, to purge its institutions and to normalize its new regime by forging links with foreign countries. So I think what he's saying there is you need to get up a polity, a system that is recognized, works, carries authority and is recognized by other states. I would say I'm not so sure that you need other states' recognition, but I think you certainly need your own population to give authority to the new polity. And that needs to be got up fast as well if the old one breaks down. That's why I put such an emphasis on creating law. If the law breaks down and the state breaks down, make sure you can find law, which I think we'll have to do by clubbing together, by doing it voluntarily, individually, joining it by voting with our feet. Anyway, he goes on. The question that will arise is indeed the following. How far is the French population ready to go to guarantee its survival and the future of its children? And what he says is, but after more than 5 years of reflection on the subject, we have arrived at the scenario that I think is the most realistic. So he, with his colleagues, has been wargaming this out for 5 years. And from our point of view, we have experimented with it in the form of an accelerated war game over a dozen hours with a blue team, a red team and observers. The military part of this scenario is of no interest since it is pure speculation. But on the other hand, the earlier part, the triggering, seems to me important to share. I will try to summarize our thoughts simply. So how does it all begin? The triggering. Now this is interesting because this was written 2 years ago, and look how accurate it is. Phase 1, triggering, nationwide riots. A police check degenerates. The images are broadcasted on social networks like Snapchat. Several cities are rioting. Left-wing politicians indirectly encourage tensions through their media relays by organising demonstrations, by calling high schools and university students to block their schools. The situation degenerates into nationwide riots. So he got that right 2 years ago. Now, what he's then saying, so that means we can give credence to what he's projecting about the future. Phase 2, transition, political instability. Finally, in our scenario, after several weeks and many deaths, facing international pressure, calm returns. But the situation is never the same again. The violence has left its mark on the country like a trauma on the scale of society. The red line is definitely drawn on the ground between the two sides. The self-defense groups formed by citizens during the unrest continue to exist informally and to grow stronger and more organised, because everyone has the feeling that these events could happen again. So he's saying that there will be rumbling, continuing disorder and spluttering violence. And then phase 3, war or not. And he summarises this phase 3. The triggering will be in 3 phases. First phase is the riots or quasi-war, then the transition phase, then the final phase, which will correspond to either to definitive appeasement or to a political solution, apartheid or total war. In all the scenarios we have studied over the last 5 years, we have always found these different phases and this particular model. Ultra-violent riots, a transition phase, a final phase. It is the transition phase that is the most crucial in this pattern, because it is during this phase that everything will be played out. The transition phase, I think that's where French people make up their minds. Which side are we going to be on? That is what will give authority to the army if it then takes action. Now, I think a lot of what he says is right there. There's a couple more bits. The tension does not seem to me to be important enough to imagine a conflict before 2030. This is his timing here. He's saying he doesn't think it will happen before 2030. I think it will happen around 2030. I think that's when the breakdown is likely to come, sometime around 2030. And if nothing has happened by 2050, it's probably too late, and the situation is definitely lost. So that leaves us with 10 years to prepare for that 20-year window. I think it will happen at the start of that 20-year window. The challenge of recalling what the people is, a 1,000-year-old lineage to be protected like a treasure, not a mass of fungible and corruptible individuals. Yeah, bought off by welfare. Yeah, we're not interchangeable. French people have an identity, and that is valuable to them. French people are entitled to their homeland. Every group is, particularly French people, who, in my personal opinion, have constructed over centuries the most intoxicating and pleasure-filled culture on earth that the world has ever seen. So our entire history has prepared us to fulfill this task, to accomplish this role, to be the people through whom paradigm shifts come. This is a little bit of rhetoric here, so don't despair. As this corporal of my unit said, the fight of our life is the Battle of France. Okay, that is this gentleman. He's not named, but that is the French officer, and you can read this for yourself if you want. Now, I agree with most of what he said. I admire his clarity of mind, and I repeat, I wish, like him, I had people to game this out with. I don't. I generally have to think it through on my own. But what I especially agree with is where he says that it is the French people, what ordinary French people decide, being the crucial factor. Unlike him, I'm not convinced that war is necessary. I think even saying that encourages people to leave it to someone else to deal with, non-soldiers to leave it to the soldiers to deal with. I agree with him that reclaiming France means taking back French territory for French people. And that necessarily implies repatriating non-French people out of France. And I think the key to this is not war and conflict. The key to this is the hard, clear separation of populations. The fantasy scenario that we can have a mixed society and then we can employ special forces to go house to house, weeding out foreign people, but going through every cupboard, every wardrobe, every crawl space, every attic, with oxygen detectors and heat detectors in order to throw foreign people out on the streets and then into camps in order to deport them. I think that is fantasy. I don't think that can be accomplished. The necessary thing, 3/4 or 80% of this, I think, is accomplished when populations separate out and separate out hard and formally. And I think for France to be able to do that, what France needs is two things. Firstly, complete freedom of association, and that means freedom of non-association. You can choose who you associate with and who you decide not to associate with. A bit like in your living room. You can decide who comes in and who doesn't come in and who you want to kick out. And French people have the right to decide who they do and don't want to live with in their own country. And I don't think it's not a matter of kicking people out initially. It's a matter simply of saying we want to associate with these people and not those people. And I don't think that complete freedom of association will come until the state breaks down, or the welfare democratic state at least, because the welfare democratic state won't and can't allow for that, because it will mean a loss of the monopoly of authority that the democratic state has if you allow people to associate with who they want and then to police their areas to prevent people they don't want from coming in. And so when the state breaks down, which I think will happen, I think we are seeing the very, very first hints of that happening in France as a result of these riots. When the state breaks down, then I think we will see complete freedom of association in France. That's the first factor. The second factor is to allow life to jam people's faces firmly into the grindstone of reality. You take away the cradle to grave protection, nannying and mollycoddling, and you force people to deal with the realities of life for themselves. People can do this. When people do this, people make sober, realistic, clear-eyed decisions. And I think that will come with the breakdown of the welfare state. And I think the breakdown of the state, the breakdown of the welfare state, those things will go hand in hand. So when the French state breaks down, then I think you'll see the breakdown of the French welfare state. And I think those two things will be accomplished. Freedom of association and people being forced to address reality for themselves. Once the French have that, I think they will then separate out from foreign populations. And that separation is the overwhelming majority of the steps that are needed in order to repatriate foreign populations from French soil. And I think if France has that population separation, I don't think it will need to resort to war, or not to very much war, in order to regain French territory for French people. In any event, I think we can watch and learn from what is happening in France with clear eyes, because we should do that, because I think what is happening to them will happen to us a few years later. Thank you.